we were squandering those things that our fathers and our grandfathers and great grandfathers built for us. I think that the example that I had, although you hit on one also, which is uh, one of the things that apparently I was ahead of the curve on, relative again to what you hear and read, is that I taught my managers from day one. We'll change today what we change tomorrow. I'm non emotional about work whatsoever, and if you spend a month working on something and it just doesn't work, change it back. But we want to fight, we want to defend it, and I spent all this time doing it, and I go, that there's no money to be made in that. Change today what we changed yesterday, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to stay alive. And some of my businesses are, 23, 24 years old, been around a long time. And that seemed to work for me. But to your point, one of the examples that they're always telling us, and it's probably written by older people, is that whole have your 3 to 5 year plan. Make sure you're hitting every number, make sure you're doing all of your strategizing, and you spend inordinate amount of amount of money and time doing things that, quite frankly, I never have. And I've done hundreds of millions of dollars, so it kind of is lost on me from that perspective. The other thing is, again, back to the media, like working from home, just as a more specific item. I number one, I don't get anywhere near the productivity working from home, and the employees don't like working from home. They want to escape from working from home, but I continue to have it pounded into us that this is what the young kids want to do. This is the new thing. Everybody wants to work home. The paradigm is changing. This is what the future is going to look like. And I'm sitting here going, and me and my contemporaries going, we're just not seeing it. They want to come and have lunch with their friends, and they want to hang out in offices, and they don't want to sit home and work,
Yeah.
at least at our size.
Yeah. Well, it could be. I mean, clearly any polarized view of life is unlikely to be wise. And so if we said everybody work at home, well, of course there are going to be people
Sure.
that don't want to do that. Everybody work at work and you can't work at home. Of course there are going to be people that want to work at home. I think each business has its own different trajectory and its own different tendencies. So there's some businesses where the natural fluid interaction of folks are an essential part of creativity and innovation. And there are others that you can break it apart into small pieces and each person do their own thing, works just fine. So I don't have a one size fits all. And I challenge anybody to define a one size fits all model for work at home or work in the office. It's different in different places, and part of wisdom has something to do with taking into account all the variables that are true for us, including the people and what they want to do.
Yeah.
Let's take that into account as well, and then shape a strategy that makes sense. I'll give you one example. One of my clients, he was staunchly against people working at home. There were a number of younger people who didn't want to go to work every day. And there were a lot of developers, software developers, who found that when they're in the office, they get interrupted so darn much that it's hard for them to keep a train of thought in their logic stream that enables them to produce a good software solution. And so some of them were saying, please, dear God, let me work at home, or let me have my own closed office. And all the researchers were talking about creativity happening in a group environment. And I'm going, right. I'm not very creative right now at all. I'm annoyed.
Yeah,
and
right.
So that particular group of people wanted to work at home. And the CEO was saying, nope. The research says work in the office in an open environment with collaboration will yield greater creativity. And I want creativity, so that you're going to work at the workplace. Well, that's too rigid. I know the model and I know what's best for people. COVID comes along and they couldn't work at work. And all of a sudden he found these people were equally as productive at home. And then he said, okay, I need to change the model. I was wrong. And where he came to was a nice in-between place where he says, once a week, I want us to come and touch base. Mm-hmm. I want us to be in the office. He reduced the office space itself. We don't need such big offices anymore. But I do want us to come and meet. And I do want us to connect and explore things and create kind of this emotional tensile strength that comes better when we're in the same environment. I want to feed you all. I want to, break bread together. And so please come once a week. Beyond that, each team gets to decide whether they want to come together or whether they want to stay separate. I'll leave it up to you, and I'm going to trust your own wisdom to figure out what's best for you given the nature of your work. So some groups would go to the office a lot, and it worked well for them, and others didn't, and that worked well for them. And so the pliability or the wisdom to give room for what wants to emerge, that to me is the effective solution, not we're going to always do it this way or always that way.
Interesting.
And this is what it takes
Go
in a
ahead.
VUCA world. This is what it takes in a VUCA world.
Right. Right. We're talking to Keith Merron, founder and managing partner of Avista Consulting Group. He is the author. His latest book is The Art of Transformational Coaching. So let's talk about that for a bit, Keith. There's a word that you use, paradigm, and the paradigm shifts and the paradigm changes. And specifically, my first question for you along these lines is back to your grandfather and your father. You alluded to it, that there was a paradigm that shift at both generational levels. Tell us about that, if you would, please.
Sure. And by the way, sorry to correct you. The consulting firm is Leadership Pathways. I don't
Oh,
know. I don't know how you got an older bio, but the bio you read from is new, except for the title of my company, which is Leadership Pathways, no longer Vista. I'm not sure it matters a whole lot. But I mean, I could talk about my father and my grandfather, but we're really talking about generational changes. And my grandfather, like many people who were born around 1900, grew up in an environment that's very, very different today. It was not nearly as international. Most people never went outside their town or outside their state. Uh, 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 there was a lot more survival orientation at the time, at least in the United States. And it was on the strength of my grandfather's generation that a wealthy generation emerged. And that's the generation of my parents and your parents.
hmm
And their generation definitely was breaking away from the stale approaches of the past and feeling their oats. And a lot of our parents' generation in the 40s and 50s partly did the right thing by their country, went to war and all that, but partly were trying to really stretch the boundaries. And in many ways, my generation is the wealthiest generation on the history of the planet, and your generation as well. We benefited from our parents and what they did. And with privilege comes a little bit of lack of responsibility.
Yeah.
It also comes a sense of entitlement. It also comes an enormous amount of freedom to believe we can be whatever we want to be. Our parents believed that to some extent, and they worked extraordinarily hard to create a world of wealth that we now enjoy. And then our generation and the next generation, my children's generation, have an enormous amount of freedom, greater wealth. I'm afraid, sadly, the wealth is now reducing. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing. And so you see my children's generation is actually not as wealthy as our generation is. For the first time in the history of the planet, or the history of the United States, wealth went down for our children's generation, and they're suffering. Some of them are in their 30s and still living at home. The cost of education is astronomical for them, and so they suffer. But our generation has really grown from the seeds or from the strength of our parents and what they did to create so much of what modern life now looks like. Whether you like it, whether you don't, whether you think that modern life is filled with pollution and it's the dangers, which I actually do think it is filled with some of that. It's also filled with great opportunity that exists for my generation and the next generation. So I don't know if we're departing, but we're building from the past, and now the younger generation is inheriting. Oh my goodness, some dangers that didn't exist so much when we were growing up. I mean, the amount of pollution and the amount of global warming, which I do personally believe does exist. How much of it is man-made? How much of it is natural evolution? I can't say, but you can see the signs of global warming, no doubt about it. And and so they're inheriting some dangers. They're also inheriting a world where it can be destroyed in a push of a button. Global nuclear war is something that they now recognize. So we'll talk about paradigms in a second, but to me, that's how I think about the intergenerational evolution.
Yeah, my thought there is, or the next question along those lines is, it seems inevitable. There's that saying, hard men make, or tough times make hard men make good times make soft men make hard times.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
Eh right? And I think that kinda has the feel to it today as we see that income shrink and we see for the first time ever, that maybe we've just gotten too fat and too happy, and maybe we're squandering those things that our fathers and our grandfathers and great-grandfathers built for us.